All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome or welcome back. My name is Ken Rosenthal. I'm a park naturalist at Gulf Branch Nature Center, and tonight we are going to talk about the periodical cicadas that are, in some cases, already out and about today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get started. Again, just a reminder that I will be recording, so if you don't want to appear on the video, you can turn your camera off. Let's go ahead to, there we go. Oops. All right. All right. So again, good evening, everyone. We are going to talk about the return of the cicadas, the return of brood X or brood 10, depending on how you like your X's, if you prefer to stick with the number or just like to say the letter. But that is who we're going to talk about. So if you haven't been with me before, I always like to make sure we're all on the same page and get everybody acquainted with who we're looking at. So we're going to go over some basics of what is and isn't a cicada and make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Periodical cicada on the left, dog day cicada on the right. These guys on the right are not coming out for a few more weeks. The one on the left will be out. Some of them are already out, some of them are coming out. So, all right. So we've got short antenna. So these are cicada. These are characteristics of cicada. You got these very short antenna. You can barely see them on the dog day one here. And you have eyes set wide apart, a lot of space between it. These are bigger eyes here. In between, there are actually three smaller eyes called ocelli. And ocelli are pretty much light and dark sensing eyes. They do very little other than, it's light or dark. It's really helpful if, when a shadow passes over, that could be a predator. If you've ever tried to get close to an insect or take a picture and your shadow goes over them, then they take off, it's because it might be because you've tripped their ocelli. And so that is something in there as well. There's three in the middle there. I believe the dog days have the same number. And then these membranous front wings. And you can see they both have them as well. I don't know if these pictures are to scale, but the dog day are bigger than the periodical, and we'll come back and talk about that as well. And they are both loud. Loud is all about attracting a mate, making sure that the females know you're there. And so they can be very loud, and they can sing and the periodicals will sing in choruses. The dog days kind of sing by themselves, which you're about to learn in about a week or so here. They are not locusts. Excuse me, locusts are Orthoptera, and Orthoptera means they are grasshoppers, crickets, katydids. That is a family. It's a much different group here, and we'll talk about where the cicadas belong. This is a nice old image of a locust swarm. We don't really have to worry too much about these locusts from here. They have definitely been an issue in other places like Africa. And locust, again, is I think can be a very local word. I don't remember. I grew up in north of here in northwestern Pennsylvania. I don't remember ever hearing cicadas called locust until I moved down into this area. And so I think sometimes locust is very much can be a very regional term for some of them, but it also often I think refers to the periodical more than the dog day because they do come out in these big swarms, but they're not anywhere near as devastating to a crop swarm as some locust swarms can be. They're definitely not that kind of an issue for a food crop. And so giving them the wrong name can imply or can bring a bias against them or imply something negative about them that really isn't true. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. These are cicadas, they're not locusts. There are people that call them cicada locusts, which is, again, the pitfalls of using common names, but they're definitely not locusts. So going to the tree of life, where are we? We're going to run through these here and get you into the species here. Obviously, I hope we're all agreed that they are animals. They're in the phylum Euarthropoda, which is a fancy word. It does not include velvet worms, but it does include crustaceans. It includes centipedes and millipedes, spiders, and other arachnids like scorpions, all of the insects, and some extinct groupings like these sea scorpions, which are really fantastic and interesting. Are insects. We're in the class Insecta, so they are lumped in with a group with dragonflies and damselflies. Again, the orthopterans, the crickets, the grasshoppers, the katydids, flies, beetles, and the Hymenoptera. And I've specifically included this one here, even though it's actually not going to interact with our cicadas, but this is a cicada killer wasp. They typically don't mature until later in summer, and they're more synced to the dog day cicadas. They will attack a cicada, sting it, drag it down into their burrow and lay an egg on it, which the egg will then hatch and feed on the paralyzed cicada, which is fantastic and a whole other story for a whole other program. But because the cicada killers come out and are more synced to our dog day cicadas, which come out later, the cicada killers do not actually become an issue or have any kind of significance with our periodical cicadas. So that one predator that the periodical cicadas have managed to dodge. Otherwise, there's not going to be a whole lot of them that they do get to dodge. And we are in the order Hemiptera. So Hemiptera is the order that is actually called bugs. When people say bugs, a lot of times they're talking about any kind of creepy crawlies. Sometimes they're including stuff that's not even insects. Sometimes they're even including worms. But if you are a scientist, if you're talking about bugs, this is the order you're talking about. It includes things like water scorpions. This is a large aphid here. It includes the bugs. This is a milkweed bug. It includes the shield bugs, the stink bugs. If it's called a bug, it's an actual name, has bug in it. It's a hemipteran. It includes the leaf hoppers and the plant hoppers. And these are spittle bugs, which I think are it's a really fun, pretty one there. So this is the group that all the cicadas are in. And then, of course, the superfamily Cicadidoida. Really hope I said that right. Latin's always fun. And this is the cicadas. There's over 3,000 species. There are some that remain undescribed. So for all of you amateur naturalists out there, there's still hope you can get a bug named after you. And again, you can see this does include our periodical cicadas and our dog day cicadas. It's also important to point out. Well, actually, I'll come back to that because let me show you the map. So where are we? Now we're down to species. The 3 species that we are going to see as part of the emergence of Brudax are in the genus Magicicada, and that is, yes, meant to be magic because they magically appear after being, not being around for so long. And Septendecim, Septendecula, and Cassini are the 3 species. Cassini is pretty rare. I think Septendecim is the one we see the most of. I think that's, if I remember correctly, that's the pharaoh cicada. And I have a slide that'll clear that up later on. And then Septendecula. So we'll have 3 species of 17-year cicada that will be part of this brood. So again, let's now look at the differences between our dog day cicada and our periodical cicada. So again, the periodical cicada is on the left, dog day is on the right. And I'm going to be a little vain here. I'm going to be a little shallow because we're just going to talk about colors. Eye color should be a big one. You can see these bright red eyes, which sometimes I think is really what gives people the heebie-jeebies or the willies when they think about these cicadas. And I did some looking and I couldn't find anything specifically on what produces that red eye or what the thought is. But my guess is that red eye is probably significant as far as giving it a distasteful appearance, possibly. Although I really don't think it affects anybody because just about everybody will take a bite out of one of these guys. And then obviously the eye color on our dog day cicada is darker and much more camouflaged in tone with the rest of the body. And then speaking of body color, very black. This helps the cicadas warm up quickly. They can absorb, the periodical cicadas absorb heat really quickly as dark colors absorb a lot more of the radiant heat of the sun. And so this cicada very much is going to need that as well, being earlier in the spring and summer. We're not in the heat of it. The dog day cicadas, when they come out here, the guys on the right, they're out in July and August. It's already hot. I always tell when I'm doing camp in the summer, I always tell the kids, the earlier I hear the cicada, the hotter I know that day is going to be, because that helps get, they need that heat energy to make their noise and have the energy for that. It's the same with dragonflies. The hotter the day, the better the dragonflies. And people think, I'm crazy when I go out and it's 90 or 100-degree day, but sometimes that's the best day to go out and find bugs. And these are bugs that really need that heat energy. And this dark color for the periodical cicada is going to really help it gather up that heat energy, especially early in the season. That's really cool. And then a wing vein color. And again, I know I'm telling you what you can already see, but the wing vein color is different. It's orangish or reddish. And over here it's greenish and brownish. So you get very different. And there is a size difference. I don't know if I have these pictures to size, but I feel like it's pretty close to the difference between the two. The periodicals are smaller in size than our dog day cicadas or our annual cicadas. And that brings us to time of year. Okay, dog day cicadas, annual cicadas come out every year. And so we see the species every year, and they always come out, July and August, mid to late summer. Whereas the periodical cicadas, when they do emerge, when we have an actual emergence in the area, they are going to come out earlier in the season, and they should be. I know there's an article in the Post, I think a week or so ago, saying next week they'll be out, and then it got cool, and we were all fooled. Which really again depends on the weather when they're going to come out. But these periodicals usually come out about mid-May, and they're around for 4 to 6 weeks. So by mid to late June, they'll be gone. So it's 1 month, and then 17 years before we get to see them again. But time of year, again, it really affects that. And so a lot of the regular predators, like the cicada killer, which depend on these dog day cicadas, may or may not be able to utilize the periodicals at all because it's a different time of year. So we are talking about Brood X. This image is from cicadamania.com, which is a fantastic website. I'll probably mention it several more times, and they got a lot of good information on there. And if nothing else, it's a good jumping off point. They have a lot of articles and other things you can link to from there about cicadas and periodical cicadas specifically. But this shows that Brood X or Brood 10 is a 17-year cicada. It shows some of the past years. So the last time they're here was 2004. There's another presidential election way back then, and lots of different things going on as well. But you can see it's one of the biggest broods. It covers very many states. I think it's 14 or 15 states that have some either a large or a little bit of this brood emerging this year. And again, Georgia and Tennessee are already reporting a lot of emerged cicadas, but they're south of us. They're going to have warmer weather quick, so it's going to move in a wave northward. Even though they're showing New York, it's really just this southern tip of New York here. Upstate and western New York aren't going to get anything like that. And I think like in Pennsylvania, it's mostly like the southeastern corner here, the Philly area. So on this map, even though they're showing all this this orange on these different states, it's not really going to be that. It's not going to be the entire state that's there. It's just going to be parts of them. And you can see these were some of the stragglers, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, what that means about, expecting to see different cicadas. But after 2021, the next time would be 2038. So this is our cicadas here. And if you are going to be out, if you're going to be looking for cicadas, if you're going to want to get an idea of what kind of cicada you have, the more of an image you can get of their abdomen, the better. This was an easy one for someone to help me ID because you can see the underside of the abdomen. And that's a really easy way to get an ID on the cicada. You can also pick them up because they don't sting, they don't bite, they're not poisonous. They're going to vibrate, and that can startle you, which can also be kind of interesting. But it's really not going to be hard, to find one of these, to pick one up. And you can just look underneath and get an image or a look at the underside of their abdomen, and that's going to help you ID what they are. This image is from bugguide.net is where I found it. And there's a link here, which I'm going to share a few links when I send a follow-up email out to everybody. I'm sending a few links to some other things you can check out as well, because this happens once, every 17 years, and I hope everybody takes advantage of it and gets out and enjoys it. I know as soon as they really start coming out, I'm going to camp out in my yard at night and try to get some images of them emerging and coming out. This is Magicicada septendecim. This is the pharaoh cicada. You can see it's got really strong bands of orange on the underside of the abdomen. This is Cassinii. This is, I think there should be a second eye at the end of the name. This is the rarest of the three, and its abdomen is completely black, so there's no orange there. And this is septendecula. This has got very smaller, very thin orange bands underneath there. And again, these two are both smaller than septendecim. And I think that, if someone could mic themselves, please. Thank you. Um, and I think that the majority of what you're going to see and what you're going to hear are these guys. Uh, I didn't plan on playing any sound. That is certainly worth a look. But in another week, you're going to hear it, and you're going to hear it a lot. It's going to be really loud. It's going to be fantastic. Um, the Pharaoh one gets its name from the call as a Weo or Pharaoh, and once you've heard it, it makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about their life history. Here's a nice old map from 1907 showing the distribution of Brood X, and certainly a lot of these bigger dots is a more pronounced record. And again, how much they were really canvassing or surveying this and censusing it, and how much these smaller dots are just that there wasn't anybody there to report it is another question. But you can see it goes up into Pennsylvania, Northern Virginia. The DMV here is really speckled and full. You can see got Tennessee, North Carolina, into Georgia, a little Alabama, maybe in some South Carolina, and in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, up into Michigan. So some really neat areas, really big areas. And this is one big brood. And they're all synchronized, so they're all coming out. Here is an updated version of the map, and this actually shows all the broods. And I'll get into that later about how many broods there actually are. This shows all the broods. And again, this yellow is Brood X, which will be coming out here. So you can see some, again, here, Georgia, Tennessee, just a slightly different image to give you an idea. This is a map from the USDA. So all of the 7 species of periodical cicada, the 3 17 years we're talking about, the 4 13 years, these are all, this is all an eastern United States, Eastern North America species, so you're not going to find anywhere else. And that genus Magicicada, which I talked about, is only North American. And the dog day cicadas, the majority of them are Neotibicin, which are also a North American species. So those are a lot of the ones when we talk about you just find here, even though there's so many species, and there's species of cicadas all over, and they have a lot of them have very similar things that they do. But what I'll be talking about tonight is mostly very much a North American species. Here's a nice, this is a sample Excel spreadsheet, but it's fairly close to the timing right here, which is for our cicadas, which talks about, this is the emergence timeline. This is a very small portion of their actual life. But as early as, early mid-March, animals are already digging for the cicadas. I've heard a lot of people talk about what they're finding in their yards, or if they're moving things and, they're finding them underneath it. You're moving logs, you're moving rocks, moving other things. I've seen pictures of people have picked up like a tarp that was in their backyard, and there's dozens or maybe 100 cicadas under there that are all tunneling, getting ready to come out. But the holes in chimneys are beginning to appear. They're preparing to come out. They're preparing to emerge. I couldn't find anything, but one of the first things they're going to do when they emerge is get out of that tunnel, find a space that's open, so they can really stretch themselves out, and they're going to metamorphose. They're going to molt out of their old exoskeleton for the final time into their adult exoskeleton. And so I wonder, though I haven't read anything about this, if that's if this digging early and making getting your tunnel ready, getting your chimney is about being prepared, because your exoskeleton might be a little softer because you're about to get out of it, and so you're not as a cicada, you're not just physically able to dig right before you're going to molt. And so you have to have all this ready, because once that final change happens in your body and you're ready to emerge, you won't be able to dig. So you've got to have that tunnel already set and ready to go. So again, you see in the yellow here, the nymphs are beginning to emerge. We've had some out already. I saw some new ones this morning. I've seen some since last week. The current estimate is that we're having some warmer weather end of this week through the weekend, and we could see the bulk of the emergence coming up. I feel like if you're an early nymph, it doesn't do you any good, because I've seen a lot of wings laying on the ground as well. And then once we get out for the first couple weeks here of nymphs emerging, we're going to get the singing, we're going to get the chorusing starts. Well, I'll talk more about their exoskeletons when they come out. And then you got the chorusing and the wing flicking. This is all part of the courtship and the mating process, and we go mating into egg laying. You can see the lighter here, they're kind of hedging the bets here, and then the die off by the end of June. Hopefully everybody's found their mate and done what they need to do. The flagging of tree foliage, and the eggs hatching. So the real question is, what have you done for me lately? We're talking about these insects in a very narrow, short range of their actual lifespan. Okay. But what have they done for the last 17 years? Well, again, I definitely meant to be a little flippant here, but you eat for 4 or 5 years, you do some eating, maybe you molt once or twice, then you take a break for 7 years. Now they're still eating, they're underground, and they're finding roots from plants and trees, and they're sucking out the sap, the essentially the juices of the plant, and that's what they're feeding on during this quote break for about 7 years. They're still feeding, but they're feeding just essentially maintenance, just enough to survive. So it's kind of a dormancy period. And after about that 7 years, they got 5 more years where they're going to eat some more, kind of get back onto schedule as far as molting, and they're going to head for the surface. This whole time they want to avoid getting eaten, which is why going underground is a really good idea. It's not without predators. Certainly things like moles can do that. Anything that digs, so they could be 2 inches to 2 feet underground. So the further they are, the safer they are from surface predators. Things like skunks or raccoons that might dig into the soil looking for food, especially raccoon or skunks, excuse me. But essentially, this is all about growing and getting bigger and getting ready for that mating period. But they spend a lot of their life, the majority of their life, underground, and they are one of the longest lived insects in the world because of this incredible lifestyle. So if you hopefully you've been looking by now, and so this shouldn't come as a surprise, but you're looking for things like this. This is a chimney. This is actually one I found in my yard, and this is a chimney. As they're digging, using their really their front appendages are very much at this time as a nymph, very much spade-like. They remind me of the front appendages of a mole cricket. They're very much shovel-shaped and have claws, and they're about digging and moving dirt. And so as they're digging their holes, they're getting all this extra dirt, and they can form these chimneys. And I'm not entirely sure what the chimneys are for. I've read a lot of stuff, and I didn't find anything specific about it. This is not an unusual behavior. There's other cicada species that do this as well. There are some other insect species that do this as well. But if you were to pop that chimney top off, you would find underneath is the tunnel for your cicada. I promise you, I put that back. But this is essentially where one of our cicadas will be coming out of. You can also look under logs. This was under a log at the nature center, where you can see they're excavating the tunnel and they're building a chimney, and essentially it's this odd shape because it was being pushed up and then formed underneath the bottom of a log. And hopefully you've even seen some of the nymph. You can see the beginning of the red eyes there. You can see those front claws that are very good for digging, the back legs. Most of the time when I found these guys, they have been moving backwards. I don't know if that's the only way they can locomote. I don't think it would be. It wouldn't make sense, but they've definitely been very good at moving backwards, and maybe that's their quick and easy way to escape. If you look at the two here on the slide, you can see the wing buds there. If you're familiar with nymphs for like dragonflies and damselflies, when they're in their last instar is a nymphal stage. There's about 5 or 6 instars for these cicadas. When you're looking at the last instar for dragonflies or damselflies, they get these wing buds, and that means the next time they molt, they're actually going to come up out of the water onto some emergent vegetation, or a rock, or something else that they can climb up out of the water onto, and that's when they'll emerge. And so when you've got these wing buds, that means the next time they molt, they're going to have their full wings. And so this is definitely, and they should be this way at this point, but these two are definitely getting ready for their adult molt. They are not fully ready yet, and you can tell because they don't have black spots on the back of their thorax. This is what they'll look like when they emerge and they're ready to molt. You can see these 2 black spots on their thorax right behind the head. It's thought that these might act as as eye spots that are could startle a potential predator as they come out. And here is the molting sequence. And again, I'm not going to get into this too much. Hopefully, many of you are already familiar with the fact that there will be a split on the back of the thorax. And so I think hopefully you can all see my highlighter here. I'm on number 5, where you can see that there's a split on the thorax, and as we go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the cicada is emerging up and out of it. They will look white and almost ghost-like. That's number 20 down here. They're going to be very light, and within an hour they'll darken as their exoskeleton hardens. But this is a really dangerous time. They're very much vulnerable to predation, so they do this at night. So if you want to see this happening, you're going to have to get out at night. Once you start seeing a lot of cicadas in your neighborhood, take yourself out on a late night with a headlamp or a little flashlight and see what you can see, if you can watch it. And this is what you're looking for, is that cicada emerging from the exoskeleton. This cicada did not survive. I found this the next day. This was during one of our bird trips. We had a restroom break at the visitor center years ago at Spotsylvania, and they were in the middle of an emergency. I don't remember what brood it was, but this cicada did not survive molting, and I remember being really sad. I was fascinated. Obviously, I took some pictures of it, but I was wondering what could have possibly happened. One of the things I learned, which I didn't know, and which was really surprising to me, this is when you look at these shells that they leave behind, the exuviae, if you will, of the nymphal cicada. These lines that you're seeing here, these threads, are actually tracheae. They're the tracheae that are essentially breathing tubes that are coming in from the I'm blanking on the name of it, but the respiratory openings on the side of the exoskeleton of the insects. And so what's essentially happening is, and there's a lot of evidence in this, I was reading a study on mayflies, and they said what's essentially happening is there's a lot of oxygen intake prior to this molting, and then it just stops. And it's thought that these insects, through this entire process of molting, are holding their breath. Essentially, they have to stop breathing, because when they molt and they come out, it's almost like their lungs are being ripped out. I thought that was a very vivid imagery one of the researchers was talking about. And he said it's essentially like they're ripping their own lungs out as they come out, because these tracheae, which come in from the respiratory openings, are the respiratory openings, they are being pulled out of the insect, because they are connected. They have cuticle that line them, so they are connected to the exoskeleton. And so when they come out, they're being ripped out. And so because the exoskeleton has to harden, that's why they have to find a place where they're safe, so their exoskeleton can harden and change in color. This also where they got to find a place where their wings can properly span out so that they don't get bent. My guess is probably the same thing has to happen with these tracheal tubes. And so it's a very dangerous time for these insects, because they can't breathe, and all this stuff has to happen before they can breathe again. So they go to stop breathing to molt, and then they don't have the ability to breathe until everything gets back together. So it's a really dangerous time, and this is a very taxing moment for these insects and individuals. And so you will find cicadas that in mid-molt they died, or they don't survive afterwards because they can't get back breathing enough. And again, this is another reason there's so many of them, so to get past this. But because there are so many of them, you will find a lot that don't survive the molting. Again, just the thought that they rip, that you rip your lungs out in order to molt, it's just amazing. And again, not everyone times it right. Cicadas that emerged earlier called stragglers. We had Brood X stragglers that emerged in Arlington in 2017. And that is these two guys here. These were actually, photo was taken at Fort C. Smith. We had them at Gulf Branch. I remember going to Fairlington that year. Vividly remember getting out, and I forget, it was a meeting or a training or something, getting out of my car and hearing a cicada chorus from the woods behind Fairlington Community Center, and it was stunning to me. It was absolutely amazing that there was that many of them going on, because I didn't think we were going to get that kind of number. And so you can have a successful batch of stragglers that produces a new brood, and there's an idea behind that, and I'll come back to that excuse me, a little bit later. But once you're out, it's time to get the party started. Let's find a bunch of other males to sing with, and then hopefully we'll attract some females, and then we can mate. So on the cicada's body, there are these two plates called tymbals, and these are I think on the first segment of the abdomen, right behind the thorax, underneath the wings. And the other thing to remember is when you're dealing with an exoskeleton, the muscles are on the inside, so they act very differently. In some ways, there's a lot of pulling than, when we think of the muscles and how we move our arms or some of the other articulation that we have. And so what these muscles do is they pull from inside the tymbals. So think of it like pulling on the inside of a drum membrane, and pull and release and pull and release and do it really, 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 really fast. And so what you're seeing here is a timbal at rest. This is letter D, and E is one that was thrown into vibration. It's very magnified, but that's what they're shaking. And then the other thing that helps them is their abdomen is essentially hollow. So they're using their abdomen as a kind of resonating chamber to increase the noise that they're making with their tymbals. Hopefully, that the idea of a hollow abdomen magnifying the noise of a small animal might remind you of something else. It's very similar to how frogs and toads use their vocal sacs to magnify the noise that they're making to attract a female. The males, the other thing that's going on here is the males have tympana underneath their abdomen as well. And the tympana are for listening. Now, it's obvious that the females need the tympana to hear the males calling. The males also need the tympana because when they hear other males calling, that's going to encourage them to call as well. And so you get these full-on choruses of the males singing, and once they do it, they all start doing it. And again, to me, that's very similar to what you see with the frogs. You might walk up to a pond where a bunch of frogs are singing, and they stop, and eventually one's like, well, he's not that close, and he starts burp, murp, murp, and the other ones all around start going because they don't want to be left out either, and they don't want to miss out on the chance to mate. And so that need to make noise outweighs the need to be quiet around the big, large predator that would be me. And so these males are doing the same thing. Now, the males can change their tune depending on where they are in the process of attracting a mate. They give the calling song that attracts the females in. A responsive female, she'll respond with wing flicks in these little noises. And that's something that the male can see and hear. Okay. And then as he closes in on the male, he'll actually switch to a different call. And they have these courting calls that they'll do, and they'll do these 3 different courting calls. And that's how the male attracts the female. Assuming everything goes well, they'll stop calling when the male mounts and begins copulation. And so they're making the noise right up until that moment. There's evidence that they can mate with more than one partner. There's a lot of evidence that the females often mate with only one partner, where the males might mate with more than one. And again, all that calling and all that noise, a lot of work. I gotta say, one of the things I've always wondered, I wonder about it with the frog courses, and I wonder about it with these cicada courses, is how a female can possibly zone in on one male, single him out of all that noise to be like, oh yeah, I really like the way he sounds, and that's the male I'm attracted to. And I haven't found that answer yet, but I'll keep looking and get back to you on that. Get back to you all on that one. The choruses can be really loud. They can hit levels of 100 decibels, which is roughly, similar to a lawnmower, and maybe about standing like 3 feet away from a chainsaw. Chainsaw can be just a little bit louder, but they're about that loud. It can be really, really amazingly loud when you're standing there in the middle of all that. And again, once they've mated, off the female goes. She's going to make slits in the tree. You can see here's her ovipositor, and she's ovipositing into this tree. And I think each of these here is a slit they made. This is the most concern that people get about the cicadas. The cicadas do feed as adults. They feed some on the sap of trees and plants. That is not really a whole lot of damage. But what they are going to make, where they do make the damage, is on younger trees, because they choose smaller twigs, and they make these incisions in the twigs, and then they deposit eggs in there, and that can kill the branch. So I mentioned earlier in that timeline the flagging of branches and leaves, and this is what happens. This is where that happens here. Okay, now eventually the eggs hatch later on in the summer, and the little nymphal cicadas come out, and they're kind of encased in this kind of shell, and it helps streamline them so they can and their legs are all sticking out the back. It helps streamline them so they can push out of this slit and end up on the ground. And once they're on the ground, they're going to kind of pop out of that enclosure, and they've got those digging front limbs again, and they get down in the soil, and they go from 2 inches to 2 feet down, and they begin their life underground. And so that's what they really want to do. And again, once they're down there, that's it. We don't see them for another 17 years. So even though I've talked about this as the return of the cicadas, they've always been here. They just haven't been where we can see them. So through all this, I want to come back to some of the numbers that we thrown out here, because I really like numbers. I mentioned more than 3,000. There's about just shy of, I think, 3,400 different species of cicadas worldwide that we have described. 7 of them are in this Magicicada genus and they're all in North America. Okay, so what we're about to experience is a very, very, very small percentage of the actual number of cicadas that are out there. There are different broods. 13 and 17 are the life cycle of these cicadas. And I got prime longevity over here. They're one of the longest lived insects. These prime numbers make it difficult for other organisms to sync up with the cicadas. And I didn't really understand that. And I happened to read a good article that made a really good case for it. If you were a 12-year cicada, animals that were on a 2 or 3 or 4-year life cycle would know that at some point, like every 2 to 3 cycles, every year or every 6, you're going to have this windfall of food, because these cicadas are great food. We'll talk about that later too. But 13 is really only divisible by itself and 1. 17 is the same. It's another prime number. It's either 17 or 1. And so you can't really sync your life, because there's not, every 8.5 years of life cycle. There's nobody that has an 8.5-year life cycle. And so these large prime numbers make it hard for other organisms to sync to that cicada. Although there is one organism that we'll talk about later, but it's not a vertebrate. And then 4 makes all the difference. Oh, and sorry, it took me a second to remember that, because 4 is the difference between 13 and 17. And sometimes when those stragglers come out 4 years ahead, if they're successful, if they're able to reproduce, it's thought that that can be the generation of a new brood. And I have read so many different things. Like, I remember when they came out 4 years ago, I was like, are we witnessing the beginning of a new brood? And people were like, no, that's not going to happen. And then I've just read several things where like, well, actually, that could be how new broods are generated. And the thought was that after the glaciation receded, and you had some of these cicadas that were going from 12 to 20 years, and what ended up happening is through evolution and natural selection that we ended up with broods that were either 13 or 17 years life cycles. But this 4-year is enough that you'll have a difference in the timing of the broods, so that 2 of these very large broods, which are tons and tons of nymphal insects, can actually use the same space. Because if you've got too many of one brood, not enough another, they're going to outcompete, because they're all using these same resources. They don't just disappear, even though that's what it seems like to us. They're all underground, and they're all eating on these plants. And so you can still have competition. And so being off by 4 years can make all the difference. If you have an area where there's 13 and 17-year cicadas, if I remember correctly, some I read said it's like 221 years between times when they will sync together. And the next one I think is 2115. So I don't think any of us are going to see it anytime soon. There were 30 broods initially named, 17 17-year broods and 13 13-year broods. Right now, there's actually only about 15 that are actually active. There's a couple that were predicted by the scientists who came up with the 30 broods, but out of those 30, several didn't materialize. 2 that have gone extinct that we know of. So right now we're at about 15 actual broods that can see. So not quite every year that somebody's experiencing one of these emergences, but pretty close. This year's is so big in the news because it's so big. It's literally, the geographic size of this brood is why it's commanding so much attention. Again, a lot of people are getting really excited, and unfortunately, I don't know that it's going to be as I think there's going to be a lot of people, unfortunately, that are disappointed because it doesn't happen. And I don't know that they've always done as good a job of covering where it's actually going to show. But around here, it's going to be big. It's going to be fantastic. 64 is that optimal temperature. Speaking of the numbers, 64 is the temperature that they're looking for. This is what they think is that optimal temperature, where once you maintain that for a day or so, that's where you're going to have the emergence begin. I read something that said that they actually keep count, that because they can sense from the plants that they're attached to and they're feeding on, when there's a lot more flow and a lot less flow of the internal juices of the plants, that's a way of measuring the seasons. And obviously spring, you get an increase in that flow, and then it ebbs by the end of winter, and you get into winter and it's ebbed, and then it starts up again. And that's a way for the insects to receive this. Whether it's a conscious or unconscious counting is another question. But again, that optimal temperature, when you're at the right number of years, that optimal temperature of the soil is 64 degrees. And usually you've got to have a couple of 80-degree days for that to happen. So again, we're having some areas where you've seen the cicadas emerge, and a lot of times these are areas that are more open, have gotten more sun, whereas a lot of the more sheltered areas, it's going to be a little bit longer before you get that optimal temperature in the soil. A lot of the stuff I've read said 5, sometimes maybe 6 instars, but at least 5 instars, and that means molts that these cicadas go through. Oh, that's something that's always also very interesting to me, is the fact that they're going to shed their exoskeleton underground and molt, which seems very much an above ground thing. But I think that's really cool. And then 99.5% of your life as a periodical cicada is spent underground, which is amazing. And one more note. I think most people are aware that a lot of herbivores depend on endosymbionts, or bacteria in your gut, in order to be able to digest plant material and food. And the cicadas are no different. They have 2 called Sulcia and Hodgkinia, and they make 10 amino acids that the cicadas don't get from their herbivorous diet. The problem is Sulcia makes about 8 of those amino acids, and Hodgkinia makes about 2. But Hodgkinia is a problem, because Hodgkinia, you can see here, can actually split, and it can split again, and it can split some more. And make sure I get the number right here. What they found through research is that the 17-year cicadas of Brood X have 26 to 42 variants of Hodgkinia in their gut. They need them all. Imagine having to make dinner and you have to use 42 kitchens to make the 2 meals that you're going to make to eat that evening. That's what this is like. So you've got 2 amino acids, but you might have 26 to 42 different little bacterial variants to do that. And that could be a real problem. And those continue to split because these bacteria have lost their ability to live independently, because they live in the gut of cicadas where they are protected. But Hodgkinia is very susceptible to splitting. Sulcia is not. Sulcia is not the problem at all here. It's Hodgkinia that is. And the females have got to make sure that every variant of Hodgkinia is in the eggs that they're producing, and that can be really energy inefficient to do that. And so what happens is, as this continues to split and break and you get more and more variants, that could very well become a messy situation that can lead to digestive problems and even death of the cicada. So there's a lot going on here. This is one of those situations where if something doesn't happen through evolution or natural selection, we could see the extinction of species. It actually wouldn't be our fault, which would be interesting too. But if these, if this continues to split like this, you've got this jumbled jigsaw of all these little bits of bacteria, and it's not getting better the longer the bacteria stay in the gut of the cicadas. So there's a fantastic article on this. Like I said, I'll send a couple links for you all for further reading. I don't want to get too much in this, but it's fantastic. One of the interesting things that they found is in some Japanese species of cicada, they've completely dumped Hodgkinia. They still have Sulcia, and they've taken in Ophiocordyceps, and this is some of you may know, this is the the fungus that actually zombifies insects and causes them to walk out onto a plant and then a stalk comes out from it, and they get their spores, but that fungus essentially takes it over. And so some Japanese cicadas have managed to use Ophiocordyceps in their gut in place of Hodgkinia, and it does not split. And so that's worked out very well for them. Obviously, we can't, take a pamphlet to our uh, periodical cicadas and suggest to them that this would be a better option. So it'll be interesting to see if there is a split in the periodical cicadas where they find another bacteria in their gut that can help them with that. So again, we're going to be focused on the millions or billions of these cicadas that are out, that are loud, that are flying everywhere, they're landing everywhere. But there's a high mortality rate. And if you're out and about and you're looking for cicadas, you're going to encounter it. You're going to find wings. I still don't know what happened to this poor cicada, but I thought that was a fascinating picture I couldn't avoid. This was at Potomac Overlook 4 years ago when the stragglers came out. But you'll find some that manage to get out of their exoskeleton, but don't survive very long. Now, this is just what's happening to cicadas. There are a lot of animals that are going to feast. This is a robin that I took a picture of on April 30th, the first day of the City Nature Challenge, and I didn't realize until I zoomed in later on that it actually had a cicada nymph in its beak. If you are an insect eater and you are big enough to eat a periodical cicada, you are going to eat them. Turtles, box turtles, or other turtles that are going to eat insects that fall in the water. Lizards, small snakes, any other insect-eating insect, birds are going to do very well. If many of you might remember, especially if you're a birder, about I think it was 7 years ago, the 2013-2014 winter, we had a major eruption of snowy owls from the north. And what happened was there was a lot of lemmings, and because there's so many lemmings, the owls did very well, and a lot of their young survived. And when a lot of their young survived, the males, when they disperse in the winter, have to go further south because there's already males that have established territories, just below that that range that they're in during the winter. And so what happens is they go further and further. And there was a snowy owl that was in Oklahoma, which was amazing. What's going to happen this year is a lot of animals are going to do very well. There's going to be a lot of extra birds, and there's going to be a lot of extra small mammals and reptiles, and a lot of extra insects because of this extra food. All those numbers are going to bounce back to normal next year. So it's not going to be a lasting impact, but it will be a temporary impact. But it's fascinating. This is I think if I remember correctly, it's a shadow darner eating one there. And so there will be a lot of animals that take advantage of this and do quite well. But unfortunately, it'll be short-lived. And that's, again, what I talked about with the 13 and 17-year life cycles. They can have a bump for a year, but it's not going to be a lasting or continual impact on their life cycles because they can't sync with the cicadas. Now, this is neat. This is Massospora cicadina. If you're a cicada, it's not neat. But if you are a cicada, if you're somebody who finds this interesting, this is a fungus that grows in the cicada. The spores will get on cicadas and stay underground for 17 years. And then when the cicadas emerge, the fungus will grow and it'll actually castrate the cicada. It replaces its abdomen with a white plug made of spores. It also drugs the cicada with an amphetamine called cathinone and a psilocybin, which is the psychedelic ingredient in magic mushrooms. Okay, what the action of the cocktail does, we're not entirely sure, but this cicada, even though it is castrated, will still try to mate. It will still go and hang out with other cicadas, and because of that, it's going to spread the spores of this fungus to all these other cicadas. Sometimes you'll even find them where the abdomen has fallen off, and they're still moving around, and they're still trying to get around the other cicadas and hang out with the other cicadas, and that means that this spore gets spread. It's almost, I read on one of the websites, you could say it's an STD of the cicadas, that it does spread between the different kinds of cicadas because of this. So this cicada, even though it has no abdomen, it still could be flying around, could be trying to interact with other cicadas, and its spores are just dropping it. Even if the spores aren't getting directly on cicadas, they're landing on the ground where they can get onto nymphs that hatch from the eggs weeks or months later. So this is how it spreads around. And I'm pretty sure it's specific to the periodical cicadas, and it has synced its lifestyle with them. It's one of the few organisms that has. And as I mentioned before, 13 does not equal 17. There was a question that perhaps some of the cicada species, the species of periodical cicada that are 13-year instead of 17-year, that the truncation of their life cycle helped them avoid infection from this Massospora cicadina, which is a really interesting idea as well, as far as when you're thinking about the evolution of the cicadas. So as these cicadas come out, is there something you can do? Well, if you're planting trees, wait till July would be a great idea, especially if they're young trees, so you can avoid having any issues with the cicadas. If you have a smartphone and you would like to add one more app to it, you can add Cicada Safari. And Cicada Safari, this is the icon will look like on your phone. And Cicada Safari has the ability for you to upload photos. I'm not sure about sound, but definitely upload photos and locations, so you can help map the emergence of Brood X, and you can also, give a real-time idea of where the cicadas are at this point. And then I think this is going to be really some fascinating data that comes out of that, because this will be, in our region for Brood X, the first time that they've been out with this kind of app, and I think this kind of community science that's in the area. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see the information that comes out of this and the data that they accumulate on Brood X and where it's going to be. And I think it's going to really, hopefully, revolutionize our understanding of these guys. So I am at the end here, so I'm going to say thank you. And I'm actually going to get out of my presenter view here and see if there's any questions in the chat. But now would be a great time to ask me any questions if you would like. I think I saw one. There was a comment in the chat. It might have been a question. What happens to cicadas attached underground to trees that die? The cicadas can move, and they can move from a thing. I don't know how fast they can move through the substrate, but they can move to another one. One of the I mentioned earlier, why are they called stragglers if they come around? That's a really good question. I'm not sure why they have the that name. One of the questions about the cicadas that came up early was, are they stressed? Are they in an area that's stressed, and the plants they've attached to are stressed, and so they come out earlier? There's a lot of questions and not, I think, a great understanding of why these cicadas do come out earlier. And I agree to your question. I don't know why they're called stragglers if they come out early, but maybe it's because they couldn't make it all the way to the end, and so they stopped early. But that's a really good question. If you see holes in the ground, have the cicada emerge? No, I'm seeing lots of holes. It doesn't mean they're out yet. But again, without looking in the hole, I can't tell. I feel like we're getting to that point where it might be closer to yes than no as far as that. But there were a lot of tunnels that are digging that I was seeing without turrets or towers, where you can just tell that they're getting ready. It seems really unsafe because, again, skunks, for example, although we don't have a lot in Arlington, are very good at digging down for finding grubs and food. And so it seems like it would be a really unwise idea to dig a tunnel all the way to the top and then not cover it or try to hide from it. But yeah, if you see a hole in the ground, it doesn't mean they're emerged yet, because we're really at the beginning of it. We don't have a lot of cicadas out at this point. Will the ones that came out this week on the cool day survive? Possibly. It's possible that they will survive. I feel like if you were one of the early cicadas, you're more likely to be food than part of the gene pool. I've seen a lot of cicada parts and cicada pieces and cicada wings already from the one that just came out. Can the fungus affect insects other than cicadas? No, I believe Massospora cicadina is specific to cicadas. That's what I've read, but if I find anything different, I will let you know. I don't think it can spread to the animals that eat the cicada with the fungus. A lot of times that, but then I also have a feeling that if you see cicada wings, that means a cicada got eaten. If you've got a cicada with no abdomen, that's really not going to be attempting cicada to eat, especially when there's a ton of more on the trees that have their full body that you can eat. So my guess is they're probably not very palatable. I don't know that it would spread to the animal, but I have a feeling it makes them less palatable and less desirable to actually eat. You know what, Melanie? I don't know. I've heard a lot of people say, they've either stopped gardening or they've been finding the nymphs and they put them back and they hope. I know I've rolled a couple logs and found nymphs and kind of put them back in the hole and hope they do okay. But I don't know if I've disturbed them to the point where they're not going to be successful. I hope not, but I don't know. But again, if it can assuage your guilt a little bit, there will be millions, if not billions, of them, and a couple of cicadas isn't going to hopefully damage the species' ability to survive. Can they be put back in their holes? I think so. Jenny and Nick, I think, like I said, I've tried to do it. I've tried to encourage them. Hopefully, I put them back in the right hole. I've rolled over logs where there have been more than one hole as well. So I don't like to cut grass. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Let me try to keep up here. How big does a branch have to be for the cicada to see it to lay eggs? That's a good question. They're smaller branches, so they don't like the big ones. And so a lot of times it's new growth, and that's why people get grumpy about cicadas, especially if they have small trees. If you've got larger, older trees, they're going to weather this just fine. It can be significant damage for smaller, younger trees because they do go for the smaller branches, but what actual size, that I don't know. I don't know if keeping the grass longer will help them or not. It'll help other critters. I don't know if it'll make a difference for the cicadas though. What causes brood die out? It depends. The couple of broods I think that have that died that were extinct. I think there was significant habitat change and something happened there. I'd have to go back and look at that. This brood is pretty massive. It would take a lot to get rid of this. The chimneys only a few inches. They're not too large. Have I tried eating them? I have not tried eating them. You could ask Alonzo how they taste. If you know Alonzo, he's our natural resource manager. He used to be a naturalist at Long Branch. He said he ate some last time they were out, and he'll eat some again this time. I could be tempted with one, but I'm going to need a little extra sauce or flavoring. I don't know if I can do a straight up cicada. He says they taste like shrimp. That's funny. I have not tried them. If they taste like shrimp, I would definitely try one. They taste like hazelnuts. Roast them with paprika. Fantastic. This just became a recipe share for cicadas. That'd be cool. As we create more impervious surface will affect the brood. Absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of I see them tunneling under rocks and logs, and I'm wondering if those guys are going to be able to get out. But there's certainly, places where that we've either paved or built things on that if they were under there before, they're not going to be able to get out. But again, I couldn't find the number. Somebody told me this about a week ago. I was talking with the park visitor, and they said they read an article that about 1% of the cicadas are actually successful in reproducing, but that's enough to ensure the continuation of the species of the brood, which is amazing. And that would explain why, you have so many that are in places where they can't get out, but it doesn't really affect the numbers because it's a very small number that actually has to do it. Again, I didn't really talk about this earlier. The idea behind their numbers, the idea behind the fact that I can't believe I didn't say this earlier. The idea behind the fact that they coordinate and synchronize their life cycle so they all develop at the same time, that they have this synchronized development, is that when they all come out in the billions, you can't possibly eat all of them. There will be predators that get sated, that eat so many they'll get fat, they'll choke, they might even get tired of them, who knows, because there are so many, so that no matter how many you eat, there's always going to be more to mate. So, which I think, like I said, comes back to that number. It's probably a very small percentage that are actually successfully mate, but that's going to be enough. And they're just, so somebody referred to it as like a brute force. This is a brute force approach that they can't sting. They're not very good at flying. They're definitely not good at crawling. They're not poisonous. They don't bite. They have almost no defense. Their defense is you can't possibly eat all of us before we reproduce. And that's how they get by as a population. Not always great for the individual, but excuse me, as a population, that's how they get by, so that there will be more next time. I think I'm going to try them on the grill. Do they know what drove some species to have such long dormancies? That is a really good question. I have a feeling it had something to do with climate, and being able to withstand poor climate, poor climate conditions and wait until it got nicer. And maybe that's part of the reason that their cue is the soil temperature, that they were trying to outlast it. Because I did see references about evolution at the end of the ice age, or the glaciation. And so that would certainly, if there were still really cold times, they could wait until it was much warmer before they came out. That would certainly be a benefit. And if you had this range of 12 to 20 and you end up with 13 to 17, that's shaped by the fact that other predators can't synchronize to your life cycle. So you've got the predator hypothesis and the climate hypothesis coming together, and you end up with cicadas that come out every 13 or 17 years. Melody, I don't know if lifted boards could help them. Certainly, if you've lifted a board or found a bunch of them underneath, if there's a night when they're coming out, that's great. But I don't want you to have to go out every night and lift the board to see if they're ready to go. That would be a bit of a pain. But plus, if you lift the board and they're all digging under there and getting ready, but they're not ready to emerge, then you're just exposing them to predation. So hopefully, they can find their way out from those objects. How many eggs does each female lay? That's a fantastic question. Let me see if I have that. They will leave up to a total of 400 eggs with 10 or so elongate white eggs in each slit. So that's a lot of egg laying. And again, so if they're laying 400 eggs and they're only putting 10 in the slit, that's 40 slits. That's part of that damage to trees that can be a concern for people that are have smaller trees that they don't want to die during the emergence. Those are really good questions. Any other questions out there? I really appreciate you all joining me tonight. I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. But this is a lot of fun. I will be sure to send you a link to the recording if you missed any of it. And like I said, I've got a few other links I want to share with you so you can learn more about the cicadas. Whoops. Oh, yeah, I do see someone has their hand raised, but I think they were putting stuff in the chat. Oh, the hand went down. Okay. Oh, you're all very welcome. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Ken. Great job.
You're very kind. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. This is super interesting.
Thank you very much. You all have a good night. I'm glad that you could join me so we could do this.
Reading.
Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved all the stuff, Daddy.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your kind words. Hey, who's that?
Hi, Mom.
Oh, there's my little cicada. Anybody have any last questions?
Any last questions?
There's a question. Hold on.